It was supposed to be a quiet political discussion on an international roundtable broadcast live from New York. The host was relaxed. The guests were high profile. Then U.S. Attorney Alina Habba, sleek in her blue blazer, leaned forward with a smirk and said it. The thing about African countries is, they're not really ready for democracy. I mean, let's be honest. Most of them don't even understand what freedom really means. There was a brief silence, a few fake chuckles. Then came Captain Ibrahim Traoré, dialed in remotely from Burkina Faso, seated with quiet dignity in a modest government office. His eyes didn't flinch. His fingers tapped slowly on the table. He didn't interrupt, but something about his stillness was louder than words. The room got colder. The host quickly tried to move on, but the internet didn't. By nightfall, clips of Habba's comment had gone viral across the African continent. People were hurt, some were enraged, and others were simply tired of being talked down to, tired of the ignorance. But no one expected what Ibrahim would say the next day, and when he spoke, it shook the world. Traoré sat alone in his office well past midnight. His aides had gone home. The lights were dim. His face was tense. He'd watched the clip a dozen times. They don't even understand what freedom really means. The words played over and over. Suddenly, a call came in from his mother. She rarely called this late. He picked up. Ibrahim. Her voice trembled softly. They're laughing at us again. Like we're children. Like we're animals. She paused. Do you remember what your father died fighting for? Traoré didn't speak. His throat tightened. They don't know what Africa is. You do. He closed his eyes. Flashes of dusty villages, empty classrooms, droughts, laughter. Children running barefoot through fields. Men who gave their last meal to a neighbor. He wasn't angry. He was heartbroken. It wasn't about Habba. It was about everything her comment represented. He looked out the window, into the dark sky above Ouagadougou. A storm was building, but it wasn't outside. It was inside of him. I will answer, Mama, he whispered. And what he said the next morning would pierce through the heart of every African watching. The next morning, global networks tuned in again. No one expected him to reply, but he showed up. Traoré appeared, calm and clear-eyed, seated behind the same desk. No suit, no armor, just his simple green military shirt, unbuttoned at the top. He didn't raise his voice. Madam Habba, he began softly, you said Africa doesn't understand freedom. But let me tell you something about freedom. He paused. Freedom is a mother walking 10 kilometers every day just to fetch clean water for her children. That is freedom. Freedom is a farmer who refuses to sell his land, even when the world offers him millions, because his father is buried there. Freedom is a village defending itself with nothing but songs and courage when no one else comes to help. Africa doesn't understand freedom. He leaned forward. We've lived without food, without electricity, without weapons, but we've never lived without dignity. The room was silent. Somewhere in Lagos, an old man wiped tears from his eyes. In Nairobi, a teacher replayed the clip 5 times before school. In South Africa, children stood taller that day. Africa had just spoken, and the world could no longer look away. In a small village in northern Ghana, 9-year-old Eli sat cross-legged on the cracked floor of his grandmother's hut. The black and white TV flickered as Traoré's speech echoed through the room. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood the feeling. We have never lived without dignity. Eli looked up at his grandmother. Tears were streaming down her face. Why are you crying, Nana? Because, she whispered. We've waited too long to hear someone say that for us. Eli had grown up watching his father carry sacks of cassava barefoot. He had seen his mother give up her food just so he and his sister could eat. But they never begged. They never bowed. Now a man on TV, a man with a voice calm like a father's, was telling the world, Africa is not weak. In that moment, Eli didn't feel poor. He didn't feel forgotten. He felt seen. Across the continent, similar moments were happening. In dusty homes, in schoolyards, in refugee camps. The world saw a political statement, but Africans saw something else. They saw a mirror. And for the first time, they liked what they saw. Back in Washington, D.C., the African Union building was buzzing. Phones rang non-stop. Journalists flooded inboxes. News anchors scrambled for translations of Traoré's speech. Inside the U.S. State Department, Alina Habba's office was locked. Sources said she hadn't left the building since the backlash began. Online, hashtags like Chine Africa Deserves, Respect and Chine Traoré Voice trended globally. Even black communities in the U.S. rallied behind him, hosting Twitter spaces titled, Finally, a Leader Who Said It. But behind the scenes, things were tense. A leaked memo revealed that several African embassies had filed formal complaints. One even demanded a public apology. Alina sat frozen in her chair, her confident smile long gone. She played Traoré's words again. We've lived without food, without electricity, without weapons, but we've never lived without dignity. His voice was calm, but it burned. What she thought would be a forgettable comment had become an international fire. And yet, the man who started it all wasn't basking in attention. Captain Traoré had disappeared from the media. No interviews, no posts, just silence. Where was he? Why had he gone quiet? And what would happen when he finally spoke again? Days passed. Then came the letter. It was handwritten in broken French, mailed from a village in Mali. The handwriting shook with age, but the words were clear. My name is Aminata. I am the widow of Boubacar Diallo, who died in 1993 fighting rebels with only a rusted rifle. He was shot twice but refused to retreat. Before he died, he whispered to me, Don't let them forget us. Captain Traoré, I thought the world forgot. But when I saw your face on the news, I felt like my husband was alive again. Thank you for not letting them forget. The letter reached Traoré's office just before dawn. He didn't speak as he read it. He just folded it, placed it inside his uniform jacket, and stared out the window. He wasn't a man who cried easily, not when his comrades were killed, not when his country was mocked. But that morning, he cried silently, because he knew. He wasn't just speaking for today. He was speaking for every voice that history buried. And the world was finally listening. In a dusty refugee camp near the Burkina Faso border, 12-year-old Mariam sat beside a torn UN tent. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Not because there wasn't food, but because she'd lost her will to hope. She had watched her father die during a militia raid. Her school was turned into a rebel outpost. Her little brother still screamed at night. That morning, a woman named Aja, the camp volunteer, gently placed a phone near Mariam and whispered, Watch this. It was a clip of Captain Traoré's speech, his voice soft, his face steady. We are not a broken people. We are a rising people. Something happened in Mariam's chest. Her lip trembled. Her eyes widened. She stared longer than she had stared at anything in weeks. After the video, she whispered her first full sentence in days. He's like my papa. He looks like my papa. That evening, Mariam ate. Not much, but enough to keep breathing. In that one moment, Traoré had done more than speak. He gave a starving girl her first reason to live. And in the silence of that camp, the spirit of Africa had stirred once more. After nearly a week of silence, Traoré finally agreed to speak again. Not to a Western network, not in a gold-trimmed room. He chose a local Burkina TV station, one with an old desk, flickering lights, and a crackling mic. And yet, within 4 hours, it was the most viewed interview across Africa. He didn't shout. He didn't blame. "Africa is not asking for pity," he said. "We are asking for respect." He held up a photo of a farmer in the Sahel who rebuilt his home with mud after floods destroyed it 3 times. This man never made the news, but he's what Africa looks like. He spoke of nurses who walk for miles to reach patients, teachers who haven't been paid in 6 months but still show up, grandmothers raising 5 orphans with their bare hands. And finally, we are not poor. We are not backward. We are not a people in need of saving. We are the world's oldest soul, just waiting to be remembered. The world leaned in. And for the first time in decades, Africa wasn't a headline of disaster. Africa was a voice of truth. Backstage at the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, cameras were being set up for a televised panel. Dozens of presidents and foreign ministers adjusted their suits and scarves. But one man, the president of Sierra Leone, known for rarely showing emotion, stood still, wiping his face with a white cloth. An aide leaned in. "Are you all right, sir?" He nodded slowly. "I watched Traoré's full speech last night," he whispered, 3 times. "I cried like a child, not because I was sad, but because someone finally spoke for us." He wasn't alone. By morning, 7 other African leaders had issued joint support statements, calling for an annual Day of African Dignity, inspired by Traoré's words. At the summit, Traoré walked in without bodyguards, without a tie, just his calm, steady walk and humble eyes. As he took his seat, dozens stood to clap. Not because protocol required it, not because the cameras were rolling, but because they felt it in their bones. This man wasn't just defending a continent, he was restoring its soul. In a small village near Wahiguya, a group of children sat on stones under a mango tree. That was their school. No roof, no walls, just dusty notebooks and hope. Their teacher, Mr. Musa, once had the chance to leave for France, but he stayed, saying, "If I go, who will teach them how to stay proud?" The morning after Traoré's speech, Mr. Musa played the video from a cracked radio. At the words, "Our children are not burdens, they are Africa's light," the class froze. A young boy, Idrissa, slowly raised his hand. "Sir, does this mean we matter too?" Musa's throat tightened. He nodded. Later that day, someone from the ministry arrived, sent by Traoré himself. They brought books, chairs, a blackboard, and they promised this. "Captain Traoré said your voices reached him." In that broken village without a roof, the children sang the national anthem louder than ever. Because for the first time, they were seen, and for the first time, they felt like the future. Back in the United States, attorney Alina Habba stared at the full recording of Traoré's response. It was 3:17 a.m. She had said what she thought was just a passing remark. Many African states still lack the structures to handle basic governance. But Traoré didn't insult her back. He didn't even mention her name. He just said, "Even a tree doesn't mock a seed it doesn't understand." And then he spoke about African resilience, the burden of colonization, and the stolen years. Now watching alone in her penthouse, something cracked inside Alina. Not pride, not anger, guilt. For years she had seen Africa as numbers, as failed states, as places she read about, never knew. She paused the video, rewound it, watched again, and then she picked up her phone. She sent a message to her team. "I need to speak with him, directly, not as an attorney, as a human being." The woman who once looked down was now looking up, at the strength she had never dared to see. At a bustling rally in Bobo Dioulasso, thousands had gathered to show support for Traoré after his speech went viral. But all eyes turned to a small boy at the edge of the crowd. He held a worn-out Burkina Faso flag. It was bigger than his body, and it dragged across the ground as he walked. Reporters rushed over. "Why are you here, little man?" one asked. The boy looked up, cheeks dusty, voice soft. "My papa died in the mines. He said one day, we'll have a leader who loves us. I think it's now." There was silence. A camera captured the moment. That single clip of the boy, eyes hopeful, flag trailing, went viral across the continent. Millions shared it. They called him the child of the revolution. That night, Traoré saw the clip too. He stood still for a long moment, and then quietly said to his aide, "We have to build something that lasts. For that boy, for all of them." In that moment, the movement stopped being about politics. It became something deeper. It became personal. Far away from the buzzing capitals and flashing cameras, in a small village tucked between dusty roads and cracked earth, life moved slowly. A grandmother, Nana Awa, sat outside her clay house, knitting a faded scarf. She had lost her husband and 3 sons to wars no one cared about. News from the outside world rarely reached here. But this day was different. A young man, fresh from the city, played Traoré's speech on a cracked radio. Nana Awa closed her eyes, hearing a voice that spoke with respect, hope, and pride. Her weathered hands stopped knitting. Tears slipped quietly down her cheek. For decades, she had prayed for someone to speak for her lost sons, for her broken family. Now, with every word, Africa is not weak. She felt something long buried. A spark. A promise. And for the first time in years, Nana Awa whispered, "My grandchildren will hear this. They will know they are not forgotten." Thousands of miles away, in a small apartment in Washington, D.C., a young African-American student named Jamal sat reading a letter from his mother. She wrote about the struggles back home in Ghana, lack of clean water, the rising cost of food, and the feeling of being ignored by the world. But Jamal's phone buzzed with notifications, millions sharing Traoré's speech. Something about the calm strength in Traoré's words stirred something inside Jamal. He stood up, paced his room, then wrote a post on social media. "For the first time, I see Africa through a new lens. Not of pity, but pride. This man, Captain Traoré, is speaking for all of us. We are more than stories of struggle. We are stories of strength." His post went viral, and as messages flooded in from Africans and African descendants worldwide, Jamal realized that this was not just politics. It was a movement rekindling hope across oceans. The day after Traoré's response, the international press was unusually quiet. No loud debates, no quick dismissals, just silence. Reporters who usually sought controversy were left speechless by the depth of his words. Instead, they aired stories about African doctors fighting pandemics, young inventors creating solar power solutions, and communities rebuilding after floods. In a press room in Paris, a journalist whispered to her colleague, "He's changed the story we tell." For once, the world wasn't looking down on Africa. It was listening. And as the sun set over Ouagadougou, children playing in the streets sang a song of hope they had never dared before. Because now, they had a leader who made them believe in tomorrow. The weeks following Traoré's speech were like nothing the continent had seen in decades. In schools across West Africa, children repeated his words, their eyes bright with new dreams. In crowded markets, shopkeepers spoke of dignity, not despair. In towns and cities, people gathered to watch videos of that calm, powerful moment when Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood tall before the world. But it wasn't just words. It was a promise that Africa's future belonged to Africans. Traoré's voice became a beacon, a rising tide of hope that lifted even the heaviest hearts. Mothers whispered to their children, "You are strong. You matter." Fathers nodded silently, pride replacing years of doubt. And somewhere in the quiet, a nation healed. Not because problems vanished, but because a leader showed them they were not alone, that their story mattered, and that they could face tomorrow with courage. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Traoré received an unexpected visitor. An old man from a remote village weathered by time and hardship. He carried a small, worn box. Inside, photos of a young Traoré, a boy who once dreamed under the same stars as millions of African children. The man spoke softly. "You gave us hope when we thought all was lost." Traoré felt a lump in his throat. He had not just spoken for his country, but for every forgotten face in Africa's vast landscape. This man's journey reminded him of why he fought, not for power, but for people. That night, Traoré sat quietly, thinking of every story, every tear, every smile that had shaped him. And he knew his fight was far from over. But now it was a fight shared by millions, a shared hope born from the courage to stand tall. The world had listened, the doubters were silenced. But more importantly, Africa had spoken through Traoré's calm, razor-sharp words. Across the continent, tears were shed. Tears of pain, yes, but also tears of pride and resilience. In the faces of those who had suffered and struggled, a new light shone. A light fueled by dignity and unity. And as Traoré looked toward the future, he knew that this moment, this powerful response, was only the beginning. Because a continent awakened cannot be silenced. Now it was time for every voice to rise, every story to be told, every dream to be chased. And as you watch this story unfold, remember, this is not just history. It's a call to believe, to hope, to stand with Africa. If this story moved you, if it stirred your heart, please hit that like button. Subscribe to join us as we share more stories that matter. And comment below. Tell us what hope means to you. Your voice matters, just like Captain Traoré's. Together, we rise.